Hey, Nick Smoot here. So today on the American Dream Factory podcast, I had the absolute pleasure of speaking with the one and only Mr. Ross DeVol. Ross is a legend when it comes to math, economics, and to be quite frank, like thinking outside of the box. This guy spent almost 20 years at the Milken Institute, where he was the head of research, and this is an institute focused on how do we unleash the American dream, access to capital, accelerating medical cures, and job creation. And his work was the work that was relied upon for prime ministers and hedge funds and all these people around the world trying to imagine better circumstances, better economics. So Ross, kind of important job doing this kind of research. One day he gets a phone call from someone in the Walton family who said, "Ross, I have an idea." And I don't know the exact details of the call, I wasn't there. But what I do know is this. It led to Ross in 2019 moving from Los Angeles to Bentonville, Arkansas, where he launched and was a part of, launching. It had already started a bit with the family, but Ross took the reins as the CEO to push forward this new initiative looking at research that would show large corporations, government officials, universities, how we can build a strong economic engine in the middle of our nation. We've lost a lot of that. We all know that. We've experienced that economically. It's part of the strain that's going on right now around the world with supply chains, and we're asking some really, really important questions about capitalism, about democracy, about better paths and better ways forward. Ross and Heartland Forward have been ringing this bell ongoing since 2019, and not just saying, look, the sky is falling, pay attention, because that's not what they say. Instead, they're showing math and data saying, hey, there's a better way we could look at things. And I am grateful for the conversation we had. It covers Ross's background, some of the work, some of the reports, and ways that corporations are using the data that he and his team have developed at Heartland Forward to make key decisions on where to put factories, on how to rebuild the manufacturing core and reshore jobs. So I'm pleased to bring you this conversation with Mr. Ross DeVol. Okay, Ross. So jumping in, from a background perspective, tell us a little bit about you, because you've been across the United States and have a pretty varied background. So fill me in.
Well, Nick, I better share the short version with you. So I don't come from a traditional think tank background. I worked in corporate America. First job out of graduate school was with Union Pacific Railroad in Omaha, Nebraska, and there's no place more heartland than Omaha. But most of the rest of my career has been on the East Coast and West Coast. I worked for CSX Transportation, both in Baltimore and Jacksonville, Florida, where I worked for John Snow when he was CEO, ultimately became Treasury Secretary for the United States. And I worked at Walton Econometrics in Philadelphia. That firm was started by Larry Klein, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics from Penn. And so I had a very formal econometric training. We did all kinds of forecasts and economic simulations and built state and regional models. So I came from the background, but I always was very applied in trying to better understand why were some places being successful economically and others not. So in the early 90s, I did start doing a lot of work. We did a lot of studies at Walton Econometrics that looked at what were some of the leading metros in terms of job creation. And there was always a technology story behind it. Obviously Silicon Valley, but you look at Austin, Raleigh, Durham, the Research Triangle. You could look to places like even early stage Nashville was starting to get on the radar screen. Pittsburgh was going through the downsizing of manufacturing and looking towards its universities as engines of growth. Today, they've made a huge difference. I then was recruited to the Milken Institute on the West Coast outside of LA to head their kind of regional economic group, and then ultimately became chief research officer. And there I worked for Mike Milken, who's very applied and not only looking at health, but access to capital, what makes places successful, what are the investments you can make, and the importance of human capital, workforce, innovation, R&D, commercialization, tech transfer. And while I was there, I did several uh, studies, developed some programs, series of policy recommendations, some of which were actually implemented in the Heartland. Uh, in Nebraska, Arkansas, work in Louisiana, some in Ohio, and other places throughout the Heartland. And then I received a phone call one day from a member of the Walton family that asked me if I would have an interest in coming to start a new organization that would do the same thing, but just focused on the heartland of the country, the center of the United States, the 20 states that we define as the heartland, from Michigan south to Alabama, west to Texas, and north to North Dakota, and everything in between.
Wow, that's a great journey. And for you, growing up in that heartland, coming home, has to have a sense of purpose and meaning. And going from, especially being in LA, it's a bit different between Los Angeles and Santa Monica and Bentonville, Arkansas, for sure.
Definitely true. I left out one key piece. When people ask me how I ended up here, I answer by saying, well, this is really how I ended up here, which was my wife's parents were high school sweethearts from Little Rock, Arkansas. And so when I came home and said, hey, I got a call from a member of the Walton family today and said there might be an opportunity in Arkansas, her response was, when are we moving? As opposed to if I would have married a young lady that might have been from coastal California, who might have thought that wasn't such a great idea.
Hey, it's important in the partnerships you find, which it sounds like you have some harmony around big picture, but also the roots. So kind of pivoting over to the roots and belief, you're long on the heartland. And these, I often refer to overlooked places and overlooked people, not in a demeaning way, but that I think there's superpowers there that have been forgotten, and great infrastructure, all these things. But what is your belief in the heartland, from a perspective of why? Why should we care? And what are the potential threats and maybe the wins?
It's a great question. To me, it matters for several reasons. First one being, as a country, we cannot be successful, in my opinion, unless everyone is able to participate. And increasingly, places in the center of the country, for a variety of reasons, downsizing manufacturing, outsourcing, substitution of Chinese imports, loss of heavy manufacturing, challenges in the agricultural community, especially in non-metro areas, what we might call micropolitans and other rural areas, the country's going to fall apart. So, call it flyover country. I lived on the coast. I lived in Philadelphia, Baltimore, principally, and then 20 years in LA. And so I've lived with those people, and unfortunately, many of them were still viewing it as flyover country. So many of the challenges the heartland faces, in some cases, were not entirely self-imposed, but not prepared to respond in a resilient way. And what I mean was the inevitable downsizing of manufacturing. Other locations were much cheaper as they entered the global economy. Some of the things were going to happen. And once China joined the World Trade Organization, there was going to be obviously a lot of imports coming from there. The heartland had lost some of its entrepreneurial zeal, in my opinion, partly because heavy manufacturing. Your dad worked at GM in the plant. He worked at US Steel. That's what you did. You could have a middle-class job with a high school education, sometimes less than a high school education. And so kind of the entrepreneurial spirit had not been lost, but it wasn't as prominent as it used to be. And, based on our research and others, if you look at what is the single most important factor about why some places are successful over the long term, it's having these dense entrepreneurial ecosystems where you have a number of startup companies that begin to scale up. Not all of them are going to be successful, but you have kind of a portfolio. Some of those are going to become mid-sized firms, and some of them are going to become large entities someday. And the way the world economy operates today and the rapid pace of technological change, some of the large companies today are simply not going to be around in 10 to 20 years. And so if you think of upstate New York and what happened with Xerox and Polaroid, it's, that can happen if you become kind of too dependent on any one industry and one company in particular. So that's where a lot of my emphasis comes from, but also on the human capital and workforce development side. I think the Heartland, the entire country for that matter, didn't invest enough in what we might have called vocational education, associate degrees in the past. And we told our kids that to be seen as being successful, you have to go to a 4-year degree granting institution. And that's just not the path forward for a lot of young people. And we made it so difficult. And I think now we're running into that issue head on, where I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with leading technology companies to, grocers, retail, transportation, it doesn't matter, who say, we've got to find a workforce solution. We can't find the talent that we need. We have truck drivers, baby boomers that are retiring, and we don't have people to come in behind them. We have skilled trade needs, from welding, just a whole range of things. And we have to find a way to be more responsive to the needs of employers in our educational system. Yeah. We need to have career pathways back to middle school, through high school, and have a progression that links middle school, high school, vocational training, associate degrees, certifications along that continuum. And that's just not the way education operates. K through 12, higher ed, no. It's separation of church and state, and it needs to be more seamless because that's what employers need. It's what young people need.
Well, and to add to that point too, is if we don't have that path to opportunity, we're not only missing out on that talent for the employers and the solution sets that might be lurking. I often am concerned about what really big problems do we have as a globe or a nation that someone has the answer to, but we can't get to them. The market forces are disconnected now because we've literally focused on key hubs as the primary, and everyone else out there, it's hard to hear them at this point. But I think we're hearing them more and more, but it's also exposing itself as a threat to democracy because people are polarizing and they're coming together, much like Horton hears a who, and they're yelling louder and louder. And as opposed to yelling, we're here, let's get to work. It's we're here, pay attention to us. Do you not understand the magic we have in us? And that's leading to angst and frustration where there is a lot of effort going into solutions. And right. The work you've been doing, I will say, has been informing people on why we need those solutions, and Heartland Forward, as well as many other great institutions. But you guys truly are, paving a path in the Heartland to show the data and the why. And it's not just noisy people. So are there any reports that you can identify or point to that wow, these are ones I'm proud of that we did with Heartland Forward, that you should Google or tell people how to find them? And are there other ones outside of Heartland Forward that you're going like, man, I wish we did that one because that's a great one?
Well, one of the things we did was looked at during COVID-19, some of the challenges that were faced in gaining access to be able to do homework, K through 12, university kids going back home, not being able to have broadband high-speed internet access, as well as remote health, telehealth. And so we've started a program that we call Connecting the Heartland. It's principally in 4 states, Arkansas, Tennessee, Illinois, and Ohio, where we're piloting it. But we're then also working with others to serve underserved communities, like LILAC, the Latin American group, LULAC, sorry. And we're putting fellows in many of these mostly rural locations to work with people and prepare them for the dollars that are coming their way for broadband infrastructure and training. So that's a programmatic effort that we have underway. But I think one of the things I'm personally most proud of that we've done on the research side is, I've done a lot of work. Kaufman has, Brookings has done some, looking at the importance of entrepreneurship. But I always felt the studies that have been done looked at startups and looked at how important startups were. They are important, but I've always made the case it's not just about startups. You want to have a high startup rate, but it's about having the ability, the kind of infrastructure to be able to scale those companies up so that they become larger employers. And a lot of people miss that because you can come up with a lot of sole proprietorships that might provide decent income for an individual or even for a family, but they're not going to have the job creation impact. So we did a report that looked at the importance of young firms and their knowledge intensity that's on our website. And so, I mean, the punchline from that is that what you might call Main Street entrepreneurship is very important, not only at the metropolitan level, but at micropolitans.
Yes.
But then if you look at the knowledge intensity, and the data set we're able to use has the employees at young firms, and you can determine how many of them have bachelor's degrees or above. It's kind of a proxy for the knowledge intensity of those companies. That generates 3 times the job creation that a typical Main Street business does. So Main Street business is important, but it's really those knowledge intensive companies that scale up. Another report that we did looked at reshoring manufacturing. Can the Heartland lead the way? We released that in February of 2021. Jobs Ohio was a co-sponsor of the work, and it looked at the entire Heartland. But Jobs Ohio shared that with Intel, and Intel was having some supply chain issues going back to Asia and China, and decided to redo their math. And they found out that by updating their math, it made sense with the proper training incentives that Ohio is going to provide to establish 2 new computer chip plants just about 25 miles north of where I grew up in Lancaster, Ohio, and New Albany. So very impressed by that. Another thing we did, when I was at the Milken Institute, we used to do a lot of work looking at the economic impact of prevention, improving health outcomes. And we did a study looking at the rapid development and deployment of the COVID-19 vaccines in 2021. And we found, because we were able to get them out into the arms of people and the economy was able to open up more quickly than it otherwise would have, it improved GDP by about $430 billion in 2021, which was equivalent to 2.3% of GDP. So without that rapid development and then deployment of the COVID-19 vaccines, the economy would not have opened up nearly as quickly as it did.
Sure.
And so that message is sometimes missed. It's important to understand the science behind it. The science is advanced. It allowed us to develop the vaccines quite rapidly and get them through the testing phases at the FDA and get them in the arms of people, which then allowed the economy, especially the leisure economy, to begin to reopen so that people are willing to be around each other again.
Yeah, they felt safe. That's a great point.
And one thing I'm really proud of with that one, Nick, is that not only was that out there, but Pfizer actually in their quarterly earnings call in the first quarter of 2022 included an infographic showing that from Heartland Forward. In all my years at think tanks, I've never had a Fortune 10 company
That's incredible.
Use our work in their quarterly earnings report.
That's incredible. Congratulations on that. Well, and I know you're short on time, and so we'll end with this. And I think it's a good bridge question because you just identified a Fortune 10 used one of your charts and showing that your data is going to good use, and talked about Intel got to see a report, and sure enough, now they're putting the plant in your childhood backyard where you grew up. What is your end game when you think about Heartland Forward? And by the way, go to heartlandforward.org or Google Ross DeVol, and you'll find wonderful things that he's not only thinking about and writing about, but also doing. It's a think and do, which you're doing a great job with that. But what is your end game?
Well, as we say, Nick, we are a think and do tank. One of the things we're doing right now is community growth program and toolkit in collaboration with Donna Harris at Builders and Backers. That's really about social entrepreneurship, trying to address a community problem. And some of these might be scalable businesses. In fact, some of them are. They've already received early stage funding through Rise of the Rest and other folks. And so we're spreading that around the Heartland. We're going to be in 10 communities here very soon. And then we have our Connecting the Heartland, which is around the broadband, high-speed internet connectivity. And we're rolling that out. And we want to have an impact. We want to influence policy decision-making. So for example, one of the recommendations out of our research to renewal, which is about technology transfer coming out of universities, just released it a month ago at our Heartland Summit. And one of those policy recommendations is that governors need to look at that, funding technology transfer offices at universities as an economic development tool.
Correct.
I mean, the Bayh-Dole Act is a great thing. Democratic senator from Indiana, Republican senator from Kansas came together, over 40 years ago to start that, but it was largely an unfunded mandate because it did not provide any funding to universities to support academic entrepreneurship, commercialization, and tech transfer. I'd love to see the federal government put more money towards that, but there's no reason why governors shouldn't be funding that as part of an economic development initiative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I love the work you're doing. Thank you so much for ringing the bell and not just running around saying, hello, pay attention, but showing the math. I think that's your magic, sir, is that you show the math. And it's because of the math that you've architected with your great team that you are helping people make logical sense of a global economy versus riding waves and trends. And that is incredibly important because many people are not doing the math. And we've gotten to where we are based on feeling and or thinking a thought might work out a certain way. So thanks for the math and all you do, Ross. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Appreciate it, Nick. Great to chat with you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mr. Ross DeVol. He's incredible and thinking about some really big problems and coming up with some really great solutions. Do go check out heartlandforward.org. You will find great reports there. They will continue to deliver great reports. I am grateful to know him and to be tracking his work and interact with him from time to time on, strategy, thoughts. How do we unleash the American dream and build stronger communities and stronger economies where we can all experience the tomorrow we really want? I think everyone has an ideal state of that tomorrow. And the question is, how do we get there together in a way that is, a success? Let's be frank, it's hard. We have extenuating circumstances in economics that we didn't plan for. We didn't plan for a global pandemic. We didn't plan for global supply chains. We didn't plan for airplanes. We didn't plan for the internet. We have all these things. And now we're in a different game. And so with this new game, we need to find better ways to think about the system. And it's people like Ross who are doing that. So thank you, sir, again. And get involved in your community, get involved in your economy, make a difference. If you don't know where to start with yourself. Make some really great decisions today that let you wake up tomorrow feeling like you're taking ground. Eat a different meal, go to sleep a little bit earlier, stop watching so much YouTube or Netflix, learn a new skill, start that company, go learn, what it might take to become promoted in your job. Give your best. If we all do that, that's going to be at least a step forward for our nation, and it's somewhere to start. So proud of everyone who is putting in the hard work, and for those who are just getting started, let's go.